All right, so today we are going to be talking about what you guys as parents can be doing this summer to make sure that the next semester for your kiddo is the best one yet. And we're going to do it all medication free using the most cutting edge science. I'm really excited to dig into this with you guys. We are going to talk about some exercises you can be doing, some parenting stuff you can be doing. And I just want to help you understand a little bit more about why your child is even struggling in the first place. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is just setting our expectations. This stuff that we talk about, neuroplasticity in general, is not something that happens overnight. These changes take time. This is not a quick fix solution. It's not the same thing as, just cutting out some inflammatory foods or, taking a medication or anything like that. The stuff we're going to talk about does work. I've seen it happen hundreds of times at this point. We have so many clients getting such amazing results, but it is more of a long-term solution that we're going to be talking about today. So potentially not something that you're going to see a ton of amazing, huge, life-changing progress in just the first couple of weeks. But if you keep at it, keep doing what you're doing, just kind of like going to the gym, just be consistent, keep showing up every day and doing these things that we're going to talk about. And you will absolutely start to see results, and we're going to be with you the whole way to make sure that you feel confident in everything that you're doing. All right. So before we get into this, we try to start all of our meetings, all of our videos, all of our Facebook Lives with just a little bit of hope and motivation to do this stuff. This is a screenshot from a text screenshot that I got from a mom who has been in a program for a while. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about because there are so many things that get better when we start implementing these exercises, like focus and academics and reading and socialization and all these things. But the most important thing, the number one thing that I just love to hear is parents saying, my kid just seems happier. My kid seems more connected. He seems to be enjoying his life more. Man, there's just nothing more important and more exciting than hearing that. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. It's possible. It's coming. You just got to do the work. All right. So this webinar is for anybody, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed. I'm going to be talking about things like ADD, ADHD, oppositional defiance disorder, which is what ODD stands for, Asperger's, autism, sensory processing disorder, all of those things. And we can absolutely help people with those diagnoses. But even if you don't have a diagnosis or your child doesn't have a diagnosis, everything that we're going to be talking about is highly, highly relevant if they're showing any symptoms of any of this at all, whether they're on medications or not, whether you've tried therapies, whether you've tried neurofeedback, vision therapy, OT, PT, whether you've tried everything under the sun or you have tried nothing at all, this webinar is going to help you get where you want to go. As long as your kiddo is dealing with true neurodevelopmental disorders. If we're just talking about parenting problems or, even genetic issues or health problems, those aren't necessarily things that we can work on. We should have a consultation and talk about it. To make sure. But yeah, all right, so let's dig into this. Our goal for this masterclass is to help you guys put together a program over the summer that is going to change your child's brain by strengthening their neurologic weaknesses. And we have to start with getting you to understand the truth about neurodevelopmental problems and to determine exactly where their weaknesses are. Every kid's brain is different, every process is going to look a little bit different, but I don't want to be the expert in this anymore. When we created Delta Genesis, part of the goal was to give you guys as parents all the information that you need instead of bringing your kid to me and having me do all the protocols and all the exercises with them and you just hoping for the best and dropping them off and going from there. I want you to really start to understand what's going on in your child's brain, why they're struggling with the things that they're struggling with. So as you start to do these exercises and you start to see change, you don't actually have to keep up with these exercises forever anymore. But as they progress until they're about 28 years old and their brain really stops developing, you might see some of these symptoms start to creep back in. So I want you to understand what functions are correlated with what symptoms, what exercises you need to be doing depending on what your child is struggling with. All right. So no matter who I am talking to, I always start with the same question. Does anybody know what is actually causing their child to struggle with ADHD, focus, attention, behavior, impulsivity, reading, writing, math, whatever it is? What's causing it? And I get a couple of different answers. Sometimes, occasionally people will guess maybe it's genetic or maybe it's a chemical imbalance, but most people really don't know the true answer behind why these kids are struggling with the things that they're struggling with. So that's what I want to talk about today. The real reason your child is struggling. Is it a chemical imbalance? First of all, Ritalin was released around the 1950s. This was one of the first medications we started using to help kids who have neurodevelopmental disorders. And we've been doing that for 7 years, or 70 years, not 7 years. We've been doing this for a really long time, and we're not seeing improvement. Actually, the numbers of ADHD are increasing by a crazy, crazy margin, over 2,000% just in the last, couple decades alone. So if it's not being fixed by chemical remediation, which makes sense, right? If we believe that this is a chemical imbalance, we are going to start introducing new chemicals to offset that chemical imbalance. That would make sense, but that's not working. The chemicals are wearing off, the medications are wearing off. This is not therapeutic. We're seeing more and more kids diagnosed with these things every single year for a few different reasons, and we'll get into that later. But it's not a chemical problem. There is actually a chemical imbalance in kids that have neurodevelopmental disorders, but that's not the cause of the problem. Again, you have to start asking, why does my child have a chemical imbalance when other kids don't? What's the difference here? So we also hear maybe it's just a behavior problem. We get this one from grandpas and dads a lot, is maybe it's just a behavior problem. I especially hear this because so many kids that struggle with focus can focus really, really well on YouTube videos or video games. So I hear a lot of parents say, maybe it's not actually a focus problem. Maybe it's just a behavior problem and a defiance problem. But also, again, you have to think about, where is behavior coming from? Where do our choices come from? What helps us make decisions? Why are parenting techniques that work for other parents not working for you or working for your child? It's not psychological either. Therapy and counseling are not working for these kids by and large. Sometimes they are, but by and large, most of the clients that I get are saying things like, we have been trying therapy, we have been trying counseling, and it's just not getting us where we want to go. So focus, happiness, impulsivity, social skills, sadness, learning, reading, anger, emotional regulation, fine motor skills, gross motor skills, eating, sleeping, sensory processing, even kind of intangible concepts like maturity, and even things like our immune system. Our immune system turns on and turns off all because of one thing. And I know that this sounds crazy, simple, maybe oversimplified, but it's not. It is all coming from brain function. So instead of helping you help your child cope with all of the symptoms that are related to their brain function issue, we want to figure out what's going on in their brain that's causing that in the first place and start to heal those networks. So when we talk about brain function, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here. And again, if anytime you want to schedule a consultation, you can text me, you can call me, you can respond to the email that I sent you the Zoom link with, and we can talk about this, because this is my favorite thing to talk about. And I think this is going to be really relevant to what you guys are dealing with your child. Okay. So when our brains develop, they grow from the bottom of our skulls to the top and then back to the front. And they develop that way by laying down these layers of electrical networks and currents, literally at the cellular level, starting all the way down at the base of our brainstem. And they grow all the way up through our prefrontal cortex, one on top of the other, literally at the cellular level. So the very first thing, the very first part of our brain that develops is our brainstem, obviously, right? That's the very bottom back part of our brain, is our brainstem. So our brainstem is really responsible for keeping us alive. Things like breathing, eating, sleeping, heart rate, digestion, all of those just kind of standard body functions that we all have to survive come from our brainstem. And interestingly, humans are actually only really born with a functioning brainstem. We don't have a lot going on in the rest of the matter of our brain yet until about 3 months. That's when we start developing at higher levels. And that's why human babies are a lot more dependent on their parents than we see other mammals, because we just have much less of our brain developed at the time of birth. So breathing, eating, sleeping, heart rate, and digestion, that's what our brainstem is responsible for. But our brainstem also houses these things called primitive reflexes. So primitive reflexes are things that you have absolutely seen in babies. Most people just don't know the name of them yet. So a good example of a primitive reflex is something called the Polymer grasp reflex. If you touch a baby's palm, or you put your finger in a baby's hand like this, they're always going to squeeze it, right? This is because of the Polymer grasp reflex. So these primitive reflexes are literal reflexes, just like when you go to the doctor and they hit your knee and your leg swings up and you don't have any control over that, right? The same thing is true for these primitive reflexes. Now, they're very different types of reflexes, but most of them are a response to nerve stimulation. There are a few that aren't, and we'll get into that. But primitive reflexes are literal reflexes, things that babies have absolutely no control over, just like you don't have control over your legs swinging up when the doctor hits it with a little hammer. So we've got the Polymer grasp reflex is one primitive reflex. Another primitive reflex that we have is if you touch a baby's cheek like this, they're going to turn their head, open their mouth, and suck on whatever happens to be there. And that is how babies learn how to nurse. So the rooting reflex especially is very important for survival. That's how we learn literally how to eat. So we need primitive reflexes. They're good. They're necessary for survival. They're so, so crucial. But you and I don't do that anymore, or at least we shouldn't, right? If I touch your cheek, hopefully you don't reflexively suck on my finger. So we know that at some point, those primitive reflexes are supposed to start to go away, right? So that process actually begins at the 3-month mark, because at the 3-month mark, now sensory function and motor function, the next layer of neurodevelopment, starts developing, and we have a higher level of function that we can live from, and we don't have to live in that purely reflexive reactive state anymore. So around 3 months, the frontal brain actually starts telling the brainstem, I don't need those primitive reflexes anymore. And by 1 year, all primitive reflexes are supposed to be completely suppressed. So there was a study done back in, I can never remember the year. It's either 2016 or 2017, and we're going to go with 2016. So I don't have to keep caveating that each time. But there was a study done in 2016 where they screened preschoolers for primitive reflex retention, and they found that 65% of preschoolers in 2016 had retained primitive reflexes, which is a very scary number. That means that 65% of this new generation of kids is going to have some type of focus, learning, social, emotional, behavioral disorder, which is a really scary number of kids. There are so many symptoms and all kinds of problems that can arise when primitive reflexes get retained or they don't get suppressed correctly. And not enough people, I don't think, are talking about primitive reflex suppression and retention and integration. Every single child that I have worked with in the past 7 years that has any neurodevelopmental disorders at all has retained primitive reflexes. I have been assessing primitive reflexes in kids for 7 years, and I've never seen a child actually not have primitive reflexes. So if your child is displaying some type of focus, social, emotional, behavioral, or learning disorder, primitive reflexes are a great, great place to start. So there are a few ways to know if your child has retained primitive reflexes. One of them is if we have a retained grasp reflex, that Polymer grasp reflex that I talked about, your kid will often struggle with handwriting or have a hard time holding their pen or pencil the right way. I actually have a family friend who just started in our system a couple of weeks ago, and she checked in with me just a few minutes ago, actually, right before I hopped on this webinar, just to let me know that she's noticing that as she's doing the exercises that we have for the Polymer grasp reflex, first of all, her handwriting is better. She has really good handwriting, but she's noticed that she has to work really hard and focus really hard to have good handwriting, and she's not having to put so much mental effort into writing now. And she's also finding that she used to only be able to write about a paragraph before her hand would really start cramping up. Because if you think about it, you know, your hand contracting like this the entire time you're trying to write, because you have all these nerves being stimulated and your hand contracting like this, that'll make your hand really tired really quickly. So it leads to writer's cramp a lot too. But she said she's noticing that she can get through a lot more words and a lot more paragraphs just in a couple of weeks of working through that Polymer grasp reflex. So that is one symptom of a Polymer grasp reflex. We also have something called a rooting. I talked about this already, but the rooting reflex is what happens, like I said, when you touch a baby's cheek, they turn their head, open their mouth, and suck on whatever happens to be there. So that rooting reflex, when it gets retained, is what happens when we have kids that put things in their mouth all the time, they chew on stuff all the time, or if they're messy eaters. All of those things can be tied almost directly, one-to-one correlation to a retained rooting reflex. There are some primitive reflexes that cause kids to be easily startled, really sensitive to loud or sudden noises. There are some that cause bad posture. There are so many different symptoms that we can correlate to these primitive reflexes, but who really cares, right? If primitive reflexes were the biggest thing that you were dealing with, if your kid chewing on stuff was the biggest problem that you had, you would not have shown up to this webinar, because that is not important, hardly at all, for most people. But we have to think about layers. Like I mentioned a while ago, our brain develops in layers, one by one by one, starting at the brainstem, starting with these primitive reflexes. And then it grows all the way up through the prefrontal cortex, layer by layer by layer. If our first few layers of neurodevelopment don't happen the right way, by primitive reflexes not getting suppressed the way they're supposed to, we're automatically going to have issues with the way now sensory motor and cognition and executive function and all these different layers of neurodevelopment can't develop the way they're supposed to because we have a bad foundation. So this is going to sound crazy, and I tell this story all the time. And some people believe me and some people don't. But I had a client a long time ago, gosh, probably 3 years ago. And this little guy was pretty low functioning. He was diagnosed with autism. So this is not something that all of you are going to be able to relate to, but pretty low functioning, diagnosed with autism, completely nonverbal, was not potty trained. He was 6 years old. He really didn't really have any receptive language either. He couldn't understand pretty much any instructions that anybody tried to give him. And I had to have a hard conversation with mom and dad in which I said, if you bring him into the system, this program right now, and I'm trying to get him to do all these things and understand what I want him to do, it's going to be a waste of your time and a waste of your money because he just can't do it right now. So I said, unfortunately, it's not a lot we can do with him here, but I want you to go home and I want you to work on primitive reflex suppression exercises. Just do that. And I know if you do that, for, who knows how long it might be, 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be a year. By doing that, we are going to get him to a functional place where he can come into program and we can do some higher level stuff with him. I just can't right now. And I'm not kidding. In 3 months, this kid became verbal. He told mom and dad, I love you for the first time ever. He potty trained. He's learning letters. He's learning numbers. The school's freaking out. The parents are freaking out. And there are no primitive reflexes that we can directly correlate to, speech or learning letters or learning numbers. But what happens is when primitive reflexes get retained, kids can't access the rest of their brains the way that they're supposed to, the way that they're meant to. Kids have all this other stuff going on in their brains, but while primitive reflexes are retained, they're not suppressed after that 1 year mark. Kids just don't have access to everything else that's going on inside of their brain. So by suppressing his primitive reflexes or integrating them, depending on what article you're reading, we just freed his whole brain up to do what it was supposed to do. And it was crazy. And I'm having the same thing happen with a client that's in our program right now. They've been at it for 3 months or 3 weeks only, 3 weeks. And he has gone from maybe saying 1 or 2 words, barely able to communicate his needs, to saying full sentences and full phrases and just so many cool things. Mom actually texted me, was it Sunday, and said, I feel like I'm just unlocking everything that he is. And I'm finally getting to see who he is as a person and kind of get to know his personality a little bit more now that his brain is being freed from these primitive reflexes. So they're a huge deal. They're so important. But the two that I want to talk about before I move on to the next thing that are going to help your kiddo, over the summer, have a better school year next year. The two that I want to talk about, the first one is the palmar grasp reflex. So the palmar grasp reflex is the one that is really going to affect handwriting. If your kid has terrible handwriting, gets writer's cramp, or just absolutely refuses to do any writing activities, palmar grasp exercises are going to be a huge, huge deal for you. So there are actually 2 exercises that we do for the palmar grasp reflex. They seem really simple and crazy, but I'm having all kinds of really cool handwriting testimonials come in from people just doing this one. So the 2 exercises we do are palmar squeezes. So you're just going to have your kiddo squeeze and open and squeeze and open and squeeze and open, and that's it, 25 times. So while they do this, I want to make sure that their hands are really squeezing tightly, but also their hands are opening up nice and big like this every time. So we don't want rushed squeezes like this. We want full squeeze, full open, full squeeze, full open, full squeeze, full open, 25 times. And the next exercise we do for the palmar grasp reflex is called finger touches. So literally you're just going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 4 and 3 and 2 and 1 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 4 and 3 and 2 and 1. So when we do this, there are 2 things that I want you to really look for while your child does this. I want circles like this. It is going to be so easy for them to get into a habit of doing this as fast as they can, and you're going to get alligators instead of circles. We want perfect circles every time. So if you've got a young kid and if you think that they will respond well to this, go for it. Sometimes I have kids make eyes or glasses around their eyes like this while they do it. So we get better circles this way. But I also, in this one, want their hands fully extending with each one. So sometimes it's good too for kids to have to give you a high five in between each one. So their hands are totally fully extending between each one. So you just have to do 25 touches. So you're going to do 25 squeezes and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 finger touches. And those two things will improve your child's handwriting. And I can't wait to hear how that one goes. So that is the first primitive reflex that I want you to work on. The second primitive reflex that I want you to work on is called the startle reflex. So the startle reflex causes a lot of kids to really struggle to pay attention, on top of a zillion other things that we're going to talk about in this webinar. But if your child is easily distracted, especially if they're easily distracted by noises or if they're really sensitive to loud noises, the exercise for the startle reflex is going to be a huge, huge deal for you. The startle reflex is exactly what it sounds like. This one just causes kids to be easily startled. So all we do for this exercise, and we're going to demonstrate it for you in this chair, you're just going to have your kid curl down around over their lap. So their whole body is going to come down and they're going to grab their feet and then they're going to fling their whole body against the back of their chair. So a chair like this one, where the back is nice and high, is going to be best for them, but you want their head to be able to go back behind it, because as their body hits the back of this chair, I want everything to kind of sprawl out like that, because they're hitting it so hard that their head and their arms naturally just kind of fling outwards like that. So they're going to curl up over their knees and then they're going to fling everything out. And then they're going to curl back down over their knees and then they're going to fling everything out again. And you just have to do that 7 times a day. So those are only 2 primitive reflexes that we're working on, but they will make a huge, huge difference in your child's day. And it shouldn't take you more than like a minute and a half to get through the squeezes and the finger touches and the starfish. So those are the 3 primitive reflex exercises I want you to be working on with your child this summer. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal. I know they seem like really small, probably not going to do anything, really annoying movements that you're going to have to repeat every single day, but this is going to make a big, big difference. I'm seeing this. This is pretty much all we do in the first week of our system. And in the first week, I get so many reports from parents saying, is it normal for my kid to be getting this much change from just a week, just a short amount of time, or just these very few exercises? Is this normal? It is normal. Expect it. Good things are coming for you this summer. All right, so those are primitive reflexes. The next thing I want to talk about is hemisphericity. So after our brainstem develops, then we start developing sensory function and motor function and cognition and executive function. When we get into sensory, motor, and cognition, our brain actually divides into 2 hemispheres. You probably already know this. We have a right side of the brain and we have a left side of the brain. And we have something called the corpus callosum, which is the bridge between your right and left hemispheres. So most people kind of know a little bit about this, but don't know the full depth of how amazing this really is. Our right and left hemispheres are responsible for very different types of tasks. So the left side of the brain is responsible for IQ. True intelligence comes from the left side of the brain. I'm not talking about grades. I'm not talking about academics. I'm talking about true intelligence. Literal logical thinking comes from the left side of the brain, like math skills, math reasoning, all of that stuff comes from the left hemisphere. But it's also where our impulses come from, and it's where our emotions like anger and frustration are located. It's the gas pedal. So if you can't remember anything else that I say about the left hemisphere today, because this is a long list, feel free to take a screenshot of this as well. But the left side of the brain is the gas pedal. It is on go all the time. Say that, do this, go here, get angry, throw a chair, whatever it is, just go do it. If the impulse comes in, the left hemisphere is going. Like I said, it's very literal and logical. It's very detail oriented. And even things like our immune system turn on because our left hemisphere is our gas pedal. It's very black and white. It's responsible for verbal communication. So the left hemisphere says, go here, say that, do this, get angry, just go. The right hemisphere is almost the exact opposite of the left hemisphere. So left hemisphere is IQ, right hemisphere is EQ, or emotional intelligence. Right hemisphere is where our impulse regulation comes from, and feelings like sadness and fear. It's our brake pedal. So left hemisphere says, go. Right hemisphere says, wait a minute. Remember what happened last time you did that? Or someone's going to look at you really weird if you do that, or you're going to get in trouble, or now's not the right time. The right hemisphere is the impulse regulation and the brake pedal. Abstract and inferential thinking comes from the right side of the brain. It's more responsible for behavioral regulation, social skills, emotional regulation, nonverbal communication, and big picture thought. So really interestingly, I just had a conversation with an adult who's about to start our system, and she has a left hemisphere delay. And she was telling me about a conversation that she had with her math professor really recently, and the math professor told her, I can tell that you get the big picture of what we're doing with these lessons, but she made mistakes constantly on things like really easy stuff like 8 plus 3 she would miss. So she would miss the problem, but the professor had to pull her aside and say, I can see that you're understanding the concept here, you're just missing out on the details. And that's a perfect kind of representation of right hemisphere versus left hemisphere. She's also a terrible speller and really, really struggles with reading. So if we have a left brain delay, that's kind of more what that looks like. And when we have kids that struggle with a right hemisphere delay, it looks more like ADHD, autism, social issues, behavioral regulation problems, and all that good stuff. So this is a great one to take a screenshot and just kind of try to decide whether you think your kiddo has a right hemisphere delay or a left hemisphere delay. But we're not going to start on any exercises hemispherically until we know for sure, because I don't want you to be doing the wrong thing with your kiddo. So anytime you want to schedule a consultation and just kind of talk about more of this stuff, a little bit more specific to what your child is dealing with, obviously we can do that at any time. You know the link, it's deltagenesis.org/consultation, and we can set that up. They are free, and I'm not going to pressure you to do the system or any of our programs. I just want to make sure that you get all the answers that you need. So we already talked about that. Executive function, we don't really need to talk about. So like I said, step one is get those primitive reflexes suppressed. Step two, we want to hemispherically stimulate sensory and motor functions. So if you think your child has a right hemisphere delay, which is honestly what we see a lot more of in kind of Delta's world, because they're the kids that are causing more problems, getting in trouble in school, really struggling with focus and that kind of thing. So if you're on here, there's a pretty good chance your child is struggling more with a right hemisphere delay. All you have to do is find activities that are going to stimulate the left side of their bodies. So have them brush their teeth with their left hand, have them stand on their left foot. Actually, that's one exercise that I really want you to make sure that you're doing this summer too. And this is going to help with socialization as well. Proprioception is such a huge deal, our brain's connection to our body. So if your child is struggling with a right hemisphere delay, I want them to be standing on their left leg for 1 minute every single day. And they're going to stand with their left leg down and their right leg out in front, almost like they're about to take a step forward. And you might be really surprised when you try this with your child at how bad they actually are at this exercise. And if they are really bad at it, I definitely want to hear about it. If they're good at it, I want to hear about it too, because there are so many things we can do to make this harder and really increase their proprioception. But this is going to be a really big key for helping them socialize maybe a little bit better next semester. So they're going to stand with their left leg down and their right leg up, out in front, like they're about to take a step forward, but you want their right leg up off the ground. And if you think they have a left brain delay, we're just going to switch sides. So the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body and vice versa. So anything that you can be doing to stimulate that opposite side of the body is going to be a really, really big deal. Again, I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, doesn't sound like much, but we get such cool change just from really simple stimulations to the hemispherically weak side of the body. So start stimulating their right hemisphere. And now you know the secret. You got to get primitive reflexes suppressed. You got to figure out which hemisphere is stronger and which side is weaker. And you got to start doing the work. Like I said in the beginning, this is not a quick fix. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, but with consistency and with time and with a progressive level of challenge, we want to make these things harder and harder and harder as they go. You can literally start to eliminate the symptoms of whatever your child is dealing with, which when I first started this process, I thought was too good to be true. Actually, the woman who interviewed me for a position similar to this a long time ago before we founded Delta Genesis told me about her son and all the changes that they saw with him. And I thought to myself, this woman is either a psychopath and she is lying to me, or this is the most profound thing I will ever find in my life. And I've just got to do it. And I've just seen so many kids get so much better, over time. And there are days when parents come in and they're frustrated and they don't want to do it anymore. And they just want to take a break. What if we take a week off? What if we take the weekend off? Do I have to do my exercises today? The more you do it, the faster you're going to get where you want to be. All right. So the second thing that I want to talk about, if you've seen Holes, this is a reference to the movie Holes, what your no good, dirty, rotten, pig stealing great-great-grandfather did, how that is affecting your child right now. It's not a genetic problem. I hear all the time, well, my husband has ADHD or I have anxiety and my child has the exact same thing, but it's even more intense. So a lot of people think that it's a genetic problem, but it's not. It's hereditary, but it's not genetic. And there's a huge difference between the two. It's this concept called epigenetics. So if you think about DNA, and I've got this up here, we all know the double helix shape that we think of as DNA. When we're dealing with ADHD, autism, sensory issues, focus problems, whatever, we're not looking at a true genetic problem, right? We're not looking at things like Down syndrome or CP or anything like that. It's not, missing or extra chromosomes or issues with the DNA itself. The DNA itself is perfectly healthy. Your DNA, wants you to have a healthy brain and a healthy body and all kinds of good stuff. But what happens is you have your DNA and you also have RNA that comes along and it transcribes, it slides around along these proteins that coat your DNA. It slides along those proteins and it reads your DNA and it transcribes them into information so your body can continue to make good, happy, healthy cells. But what happens is when we're exposed to negative external environmental factors, these black spots start to show up on the proteins that cover our DNA. So the DNA itself is totally untouched. Everything is perfectly fine, but negative external environmental factors cause these black spots on the DNA that are called methyl markers. So it's kind of like a copier. Imagine making copies and your original that you lay down in the copier is fine, but the copier screen has a black spot on it. Every single copy that you make after that is going to have that black spot, even though your original is totally fine. That's what's happening with these black spots on DNA. They're called methyl markers. So methylation occurs when we are exposed to negative external environmental factors. So anything like inflammatory foods, too much screen time, not enough exercise, trauma, too much drinking, too much smoking, adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, too much sugar, improper fuel and improper activation is what all of those things can be boiled down to. If you're not moving enough, if you're not getting enough activation, stimulation, and you're getting crappy fuel, too much sugar, too much soda, too many inflammatory foods, you cause these methyl markers to occur on the proteins that cover your genetic code. So now the RNA comes along and it tries to slide across that protein and read your genetic code. Your genetic code is fine, but it's missing pieces of it because of these black spots. So it's not just about you as a parent. This is not meant to blame you, for all the terrible environment that you've created for your child. You have shown up to here to this webinar today. So obviously you're doing a lot of things right. You care very much about your child. Methyl markers, those black spots that I just talked about, can be passed down somewhere between 11 and 14 different generations. The science is still a little bit gray on how many generations they're passed down, but this is not just about you and it's not just about them. It's about their grandparents, what they ate, what they drank, what they smoked, what they stressed out about, the Great Depression, war, divorce, drug abuse, whatever it is, all these crazy things are piling up on each generation of kids, which is why if you talk to any teachers, my mom's a teacher, she'll tell you, and I think most teachers will tell you the same thing. It's like every few years, the symptoms that these kids are exhibiting get more intense. If you talk to a preschool teacher, it's like more and more kids every year are starting to struggle with some type of neurodevelopmental disorders, and it's getting more and more intense. It was just, one or two kids struggling with some focus problems, and now it's like every kid has some sensory stuff and some focus stuff and some social stuff and some behavioral stuff. It's getting more intense every year because more and more methyl markers are being piled on these generations of kids. But there is good news. With the right fuel and with the right activation, we can actually start to reverse those methyl markers. We can actually start to remove them. So this whole, cycle of trauma and methyl markers and all these things that are piling up on our genetic code can actually start to be reversed in your child's generation. So one story that I wanted to share a little bit with you guys, we had a wonderful, wonderful client named Cian, and she was awesome and their family was amazing. I remember when I first started with them, her dad took a lot of convincing that this was the right thing for them because they had just tried so many things. And, sometimes this kind of approach sounds a little bit too good to be true. Like my kid can actually get better. Yes, they can. It's going to take a lot of hard work and you're probably going to hate me sometimes, but yeah, they can get better. So it took a lot of kind of convincing to get them to just take the leap and do the program. But this little girl was bound for juvie. She was actually one incident away from going to juvie at 12 years old. She was like screaming at teachers, cussing teachers out, like throwing stuff in the classroom. She had no friends. She was getting bullied and bullying, and she was just a mess. And her parents were at the end of their rope, didn't know what else to do until they came to us and they got their assessment done. And she is a completely different kid now. And she'll tell you, it's so awesome to hear her talk about it. I think she's like 14 or 15 now, which is so crazy, but she'll tell you, she remembers all of the stuff that she did and how she was feeling in that moment. And so much of it was anxiety based, which we don't even realize is going on in these kids because the left hemisphere is so literal and so logical. It needs perfection. And if it doesn't have perfection, and if it doesn't have control, their brains just start to freak out, and it looks like all these terrible behavior problems that are just fear-based and anxiety-based. But in 3 months, she went from one more incident and you were going to juvie. She had to talk to her parole officer, I think once or twice a week, and she was really close to being in some big trouble. And by the time the 3 months were over, she her parole officer like let her off, or at least she didn't have to keep meeting with her as much as she was going to have to, because her behavior and her whole life had just shifted around so much. The teachers that she had the next year were talking to a previous teacher saying, this is not the same Cian that you're talking about. This Cian is getting great grades and she's got a bunch of friends and she's a cheerleader and she's on the volleyball team and she's doing all these great things. This can't be the same Cian. And her parents were just like, yep, it is the exact same Cian. She's just doing so much better now. So all these problems are absolutely 100% changeable. Again, I don't want to make it sound too good to be true. It takes a lot of hard work. And that's really my whole job in this process, is to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and keeping you on track. But the last thing that I really want to talk about, and I'm going to give you 2 more exercises to do. So make sure you got your notebook out or whatever you're using to keep track of all of this stuff. But the last thing I want to talk about tonight is visual function. Your child's eyes are almost certainly not working the right way. And you're probably going to see this as you start to implement these exercises. And I'm not talking about glasses. I'm not talking about true vision problems, needing glasses or contacts or anything like that. But our visual cortex, the part of our brain that controls our eyes, is all the way back here, and our eyeballs are all the way up here, which is kind of a crazy design that we're going to have to talk to God about. They are so far away from each other. They're some of the longest range connections that exist in our brain, and that makes them very sensitive. So back to that layers concept. If we have retained primitive reflexes, if your child is chewing on things, has bad handwriting, has poor posture, is easily startled, walks on their toes, seeks out movement, fidgets all the time, any of those things, if they have issues with the way their brainstem developed, we are automatically going to have issues with now all the other layers of neurodevelopment that take place, especially with visual function. So this is why we see, wherever your child kind of lies on this spectrum of right hemisphere delay or left hemisphere delay, the visual systems and networks are some of the weakest networks that we start off with. These are, when we do our assessments and our testing, most of our clients' weakest functions are in their visual cortex because of that. So it's normal. If your kid is struggling with this, don't worry about it. But all of these people are struggling with focus, everything from autism to dyslexia to ADHD to Asperger's, ODD, OCD, all of these people are struggling with focus, because really one of the main things that drives our ability to focus is our brain's ability to control our eyes. The best way I've kind of found to explain this is, imagine if we were sitting face to face across a desk, and behind me was this huge giant window. And outside that window, we had a parade of sports cars going by that are super brightly colored. And there's somebody back here juggling fire behind this shoulder, and somebody over here swallowing swords behind my left shoulder. It is going to be impossible for you to keep your eyes on me. Even though we're talking about something that's really important to you, your child's brain, you want to pay attention, you want to focus on me, but your eyes are going to be pulled in all these different directions because of the craziness that's happening behind me. So let's say, for the sake of this conversation, on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being absolutely the best visual function possible, perfect, 100% where it needs to be. Let's say you and I have visual function at a 7 or an 8. We're probably not perfect. We could use a little bit of work ourselves. Not perfect, but not too bad either. So this situation, this would be distracting, but we don't have to deal with that very often, right? But if your child's vision function or visual function is at a 2 or a 3, which is what we find with most of our clients as they first start off, it's at a 2 or a 3 or a 4. That is really low. So this situation that we don't have to deal with very often, but that's super distracting to us, that is what life is like all day, every day, in every single situation for your child. So think about even just sitting in a classroom, even if the classroom is totally silent, which never happens. You've got, 20 other kids in the room and they're sitting 3 rows back. And this girl over here has a sparkly headband. And this kid up here has a cool design on his shirt. And this kid dropped his book. So he's making movement now. He's creating movement and he's got to reach down and pick it up. And this kid's picking his nose and there's a teacher's aide walking around and the smartboard's doing something crazy. Oh, and there's also 15 super brightly colored posters all over the room because that's what teachers are taught to do. And it's a good thing to have posters everywhere. But when you've got a kid with low visual focus abilities, everything becomes a visual distraction. They cannot control their eyes the way they want to. They know what they're supposed to be looking at. They're trying to look at the thing they're supposed to be looking at, but they just can't do it because their visual cortex is not controlling their eyes properly. And now everything becomes a visual distraction. Even something as simple as looking at the page in a textbook. I mean, there are like 5 highlighted words. There are 3 words in bold. There's pictures up here. I actually had one little girl say, if there are pictures on the page, I get a headache and I can't read the words because she's fighting. She's trying so hard to keep her eyes on the words that she just can't do it because this big, bright, way easier to look at picture is pulling her eyes literally in this other direction. So imagine how hard that's going to make reading if you can't even focus on, where your eyes should be on the page of a book. You're definitely not going to be able to keep up with where your eyes should be and sustain movement, tracking the words across the page and then saccading to the next line and tracking the words across the page and saccading to the next line. There are just so many things that go into that. And if your child's brain can't control their eyes the right way, reading is going to be very difficult and focusing is going to be pretty much impossible. So there are 2 exercises that I want you to try with your child. And I also want you to kind of think of these as a test. If they struggle with these exercises at all, if they complain of headaches or they have a hard time following along with you, it's a great indicator that, first of all, they have some neurodevelopmental issues, which you probably already knew about. That's not the best news, but the really good news behind that is that they are solvable problems. We just have to start strengthening those networks. It's not a genetic problem. It's not some big mysterious thing anymore. Their brain's not controlling their eyes, and we can increase that connectivity and that control. All right, so the first exercise that I want you to try for this one is called slow eye movement. So there are 4 different patterns that I want you to make for slow eye movement. All I want you to do is use your pen or your pencil or your finger even, it doesn't really matter to me. And you're gonna be about, let's say 6 to 8 inches away from their eyes. And you're gonna make these patterns in front of their eyes. And I want their eyes to follow along with your moving object. So the first pattern you're gonna make is an infinity sign. So you're gonna have them follow along your pen like this and an infinity sign. And you don't want to do a teeny tiny infinity sign. We want to kind of stretch how far their eyes are able to go in all these different directions, but you also obviously don't want to bring it all the way out here where they can't see it, but we really just want to stretch their field of vision here with 2 infinity signs, nice and slow like this. And then you're going to do the same thing with zigzags. So you're going to go up, down, and up and down and up and down. Then we're going to go side to side 2 times like this in front of their eyes, tracking along with you. Then we're going to go up and down 2 times like this, tracking along with you. So 2 infinity signs, 2 zigzags, side to side 2 times, and up and down 2 times. That is slow eye movement. That's going to help with their tracking. The second thing I want you to try is wide eye stretches. So this is kind of similar. What I want you to do is imagine an octagon, so like a stop sign right in front of their face, and you're going to stretch their eyes out into all the different edges of the stop sign. So you're going to start at the top of the stop sign. Again, you're 6 to 8 inches away from their face, and you're going to stretch their eyes to the top and hold for 3 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, and then you come back down, move on to the next edge of your stop sign. Stretch out 1, 2, 3 seconds, back down. Now we're going to go all the way out to the right of my stop sign. 1, 2, 3, back in, bottom right of my stop sign. 1, 2, 3, and just complete the stop sign. And you only have to do that once. So you stretch it, you hold it for 3 seconds, and that little bit right there, because I'm getting sleepy, gave me a headache. I can feel it right here. So need to keep working on my own visual functions as well. But you might find that your child really struggles with this or complains about this giving them a headache, or they act weird after you do these exercises. All totally normal things, but again, a great indicator that just by strengthening some of these connections between their visual cortex and their eyes, we can make a lot of progress in the things that they're struggling with. All right. Just another quick little story, and we will wrap this up here really soon. But I had a client about a year ago, I really need to update these stories because I've got a lot more cool ones from just this week. But about a year ago, I had a client named Ethan, and he was diagnosed with dyslexia, but he didn't actually have dyslexia. And he was in 5th grade, and he was at a 1st grade reading level. And they actually started our program right before he had his IEP meeting. So I got to go to the IEP meeting with mom and his aunt actually. And gosh, it was awful. I was sitting in there and they told his mom, never expect your son to read past a 3rd grade reading level. He is just not going to do it. So we had done his assessment. I knew he had really weak visual systems. I said, don't listen to a thing they say. We are going to get him there. And in 1 month, he was up to a 5th grade reading level. They worked their butts off. They did way more than I even asked people to do because they really wanted to see this change in him and make it happen fast because he was really struggling. But yeah, they got him up to a 5th grade reading level when the teachers in the school said never expect him to get past the 3rd grade reading level, all just by strengthening first by suppressing primitive reflexes. Never forget that. I talk about those all the time, on and on and on. If you follow us on Facebook, you know I am always droning on about primitive reflexes because they are the foundation for everything. You can do all the visual exercises, all the vision therapy in the world, but it's not going to do you any good unless you get primitive reflexes suppressed. I actually just talked to a mom this morning who said we did vision therapy and it didn't do anything at all. But when you combine that with primitive reflex suppression exercises, that's when you really start to get the change. So they worked hard, they did their visual exercises, they did their primitive reflex exercises, and he got massive, massive results that the school did not think was possible because we knew it was just a connectivity issue literally between his eyes and his brain. You give him control over his eyes and all of a sudden he can read. Doesn't have dyslexia, he just has low visual focus and function. All right, so that's Ethan's story. What do we talk about? Primitive reflex suppression, hemispheric integration, methyl markers, and visual functions. Work on all of those things. I'm so glad you guys showed up for this today. Thank you for hanging in here with me all night. I'm not quite done yet. You can leave if you want. That's all the science that I'm going to be sharing. But we actually have a really special summer system that we are offering for everybody. We've never done this before. People are always asking us about summer programs and what we do for the summer, and we've never really had anything special before. So Delta Genesis, we do all kinds of things. We do live events, we do workshops, big long trainings for like professionals, professional development. We do brain integration training live in our systems. We'll travel anywhere. There's just not enough of us yet to reach as many people that need our help. So that's why we've created our online system. So again, this is for people that are diagnosed, undiagnosed, no matter what you're diagnosed with, as long as it's not something like Down syndrome or CP. Even if you do have those diagnoses, we should still talk. But any type of neurodevelopmental disorder, diagnosed or undiagnosed, no matter what you've tried, if you've tried nothing at all, the number one thing is getting your exercises done. You know, I know I've said this like 16 times already, but if you don't do the stuff, you're not going to get the changes that you want to see. I have people ask us all the time, have you ever had clients that this just didn't work for? And the answer is absolutely. Her name was Monica. Don't be like Monica. They started doing our program back when we were just doing our live brain integration training stuff. So their responsibility at home was to do primitive reflex retention, and we did all the hemispheric, higher level sensory and motor and cognition and executive function stuff. So we didn't do any primitive reflex suppression exercises with the kids. That was their responsibility to do at home. And they spent 9 months in our program and did 2 sets of primitive reflex suppression exercises. And they were supposed to be doing 6 a day. And over the course of 9 months, they only did 2. And they were really mad by the end of it. And they said, this didn't work. This didn't help our son. We wasted our money. We wasted our time. You guys lied to us. And we didn't. We told them right up front, you have to do your exercises every day. And we asked them every single week, did you do your exercises? Did you do your exercises? Did you do your exercises? And it was always no. And there were always a bunch of excuses and a bunch of reasons that they didn't do it. And we were kind to them, but gently pushed them to do their exercises, and they kept saying that they were going to do it, and they didn't, and they were not happy, and their kid did not get the change that he should have gotten in the program. So yes, it absolutely does not work for some people if you don't do the work. It's just like going to the gym. You can hire a personal trainer and show up to the gym twice a month, and that's not going to do you any good. You have to be consistent. You have to do it with frequency, intensity, a progressive level of challenge, and when you incorporate hemisphericity and temporality, which we'll talk about in your consultation, you will get huge, huge changes. You just got to show up and do the work. And that is my job. And this whole process really is to keep you guys informed about the science behind what you're doing, but just to make sure that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing every single day. All of our systems now include a lot of support from me via text and via an app called Marco Polo. So if you're not on that, it's awesome. I use it for my family and friends, but I also use it for all of our clients, where we just send quick little video messages back and forth, and you can see my face and hear my voice and hear my passion when I tell you to do your stinking exercises today. So that's the big thing. That's my job here, is to keep you going. So we talked about support. Already been through all this. Like I said, we have a super special summer program that we are offering. So we have 3 tiers of our program. The lowest tier is $1,200. And with that, you get email support from me, and you get access to all of our videos for 6 months. We have kind of a mid-tier program where you get 1 Zoom meeting per month with me, access to everything for 1 full year, and then you get the Marco Polo and the text support. And we have a top tier of our program that is $5,000, where you get all the Marco Polo, text, and Zoom support, but you also get a really amazing piece of equipment called an interactive metronome. So the interactive metronome itself has dozens, literally dozens of studies done that prove that it eliminates the symptoms of ADHD. Now, there are a lot of other things going on with kids with ADHD, but it has massive, massive, profound impacts on focus and all kinds of amazing, like language and all kinds of really cool stuff. It's so powerful. I love using it. I love, love, love the clients that are in our top tier program, because they're just getting such crazy change so fast. But 5,000 is a lot. So we have our social distance recovery summer system that we're offering. It's everything that the $5,000 top tier program includes, plus extended protocol. So even more protocols than our normal program has. It includes the interactive metronome, and it's $6,000 for our summer program. But for the first 20 people that enroll in our summer program, we're offering it for half off. So instead of $6,000, it is $3,000 for the first 20 people that enroll. We just opened up enrollment on May 1st. So there are only 14 spots left. So if this is something that interests you, you can text your name to the number here, 314-632-6286, and we'll just set up a quick consultation and talk a little bit more about what's going on with your kiddo, make sure that we're going to be a good fit, make sure that I really think that we can help whatever is going on with you or with your child. Just text your name to 314-632-6286, and we can just start with a conversation. Again, I'm not going to pressure you to do our program or our system. I just want to make sure that you are totally informed moving forward. You have all the answers that you want to have. I just wanted to end the same way we began, with a bunch of really cool testimonials that we've gotten from some of our clients. Alex has spontaneously started saying new words and longer sentences. This little guy, Drian, did homework without fussing, quickly, focused, seemed happy, said I love you back to me when I told him I love him. Usually I get silence or a grunt. That's an amazing one. This little girl, Lucy, is adding like 10 new words to her vocabulary every day since starting with us. That was an amazing one. And then this note down here, I read with, this is Alexi this afternoon, and I was impressed with his progress towards reading accurately. In the past, he would skip, reverse, and repeat words so often it was difficult to follow. Today, he slowed down a bit, and his reading was very close match to the printed text. This was just a few weeks into their system. Reading was a huge, huge deal for this little guy, and it was really cool for the parents to hear from the teacher that she was seeing the changes too. And then this one that I showed you earlier about this one kiddo who is just happier. 1 month into program, I think we got this from his parents, and man, that is so amazing and so important. So again, if you've got any questions, I'm going to open it up for questions now. Stop my screen share, but if you want to set up a consultation, just text your name to 314-632-6286. That is going to come directly to me. I'll get back to you here in just a few minutes, and we will get your consultation set up. So I'm going to leave this open in case anybody has any questions, and then we will close this out very soon. All right. I don't think I have much else to talk about. I think I've handled all of the big questions that people usually have. One thing I guess I do hear is, why are we, I handled this one a little bit, but why are we seeing more and more kids diagnosed with ADHD and autism? We've got a lot of skeptical grandparents out there that, ask questions like, we didn't have this back in my day and in my generation. I think we're just diagnosing it more, catching it better, or we're just getting soft and labeling, boys that just have a little bit of extra energy with ADHD. And that is true. That actually does account for part of the increase in statistics. They have those numbers up somewhere, that we are literally just catching it better. But actually 70% of the new diagnoses of ADHD are new documented cases that would not have been caught before, because more and more and more kids are starting to display the symptoms of of ADHD. So yeah, I am gonna close this out. Thank you so much for joining us again. Please text 314-632-6286 if you want to set up your free consultation. It's gonna be with me. We'll do it over Zoom, get all of your questions answered and make sure you feel totally confident moving forward. If you do decide to choose one of our systems, if not, we can even just talk about some exercises that you can be doing with your kiddo this summer, some more things on top of what we talked about in this webinar. But I'm going to close this out unless anybody else has any more questions. Speak now or forever hold your peace, and I will, all right, talk to you guys later. Bye.